Hello, my name is Chris Jensen. I would like to thank the Sean Nichols Institute for allowing me to speak today on Thorstein Veblen and modern income equality. The points I would like to cover today are Veblen's ideology, what income equality is, the contributing factors to income equality, Veblen's thoughts, modern solutions, and then Veblen's solutions. Veblen was a late 19th, early 20th century philosopher and economicist who wrote the book The Theory of the Leisure Class, in which he essentially created a new class of people called the leisure class, which was essentially anyone who did not produce goods for a living. So engineers, professors, capitalists, that kind of thing, whose primary purpose in life was consumption, which he called conspicuous consumption. The idea that people consume in order to kind of manufacture this idea of power or influence. However, one of the other biggest points in that book was that modern capitalist society was inherited from institutions passed down from the beginning of humanity. To illustrate that, I would like to give an anecdote of sorts. So say we're at the beginning of human society. We're just starting to tame animals. And there's this family that is very good at taming cows. They become high up in the society because they have the ability to tame cows, which allows the entire village to be able to have meat and dairy to supplement their previously mostly gathered diets. Fast forward many generations, and cows have become a tamed species, and it is not hard to raise cattle anymore. However, in that society, having cattle is on its own now makes a family important, simply because they have cattle, but because cattle used to be something that was hard to tame and bring into the community. It gave those original people a place of power that was passed on through the generations, even though that skill was not. Income equality is essentially the gap in earnings and net worth between the top 0.01% and the bottom 90% of earners. In modern society, the top 0.1% of earners make 196 times what the bottom 90%, which is essentially the average person in America, make. However, this hasn't always been like that. In the 50s, 60s, and early 70s, the wage gap was much lower at 30 to 50%. A few of the contributing factors to that are, since the mid-70s, the wage has not kept up with the increase in productivity. Productivity has increased 200 times since 1948, while the income has only increased about 70%, increased 200% since 1940s. Another contributing factor is simply the top earning faster than the bottom. The 0.1% earn thousands of dollars a minute, while the bottom percent make minimum wage an hour most of the time. Some more contributing factors, as I was saying before, is the stagnant minimum wage. The federal minimum wage has not been raised in about a decade. It still sits at $7.25 an hour. Some states have risen that, but there are also many states that continue to have the bare minimum wage. Another contributing factor is low union memberships. The average worker does not have as much collective bargaining power as they did in the 1950s and 60s when union membership was at an all-time high. Another is tax breaks for the rich. Many administrations have thought that if the rich have tax breaks, that they will then pump that money into their business, into the economy, creating more jobs, which will theoretically raise up the bottom and middle classes. However, we have, as far as I know, never seen that work. Another contributing factor is that most of the billionaires in the United States have their net worth tied up in stocks or bonds, which allows them to have a much lower tax bracket than they would normally, as there is a tax break for large amounts of capital gains through things like stocks. Veblen lived through a similar time. He lived up until the summer of 1929. So throughout his life, the wage gap was almost exactly the same as it was now. So when he died, the leisure class was on top, and the leisure class is still on top, which is something he expected, because when you're on top, when you have power, you will fight to continue to have that power. One thing I think he may have been surprised about is that the top wages actually dropped, because he never lived to see the stock market crash of 1929. He never experienced the Great Depression. So he never saw the increase in union membership that happened after that, as well as just the crash of all wages, top and bottom, that occurred during that time period. Veblen also knew society would get more materialistic, as his theory of conspicuous consumption stated. The people in the middle and lower classes always want to appear as though they are of a higher class than they are, which means they will buy things they don't need in order to kind of look better than they are, as goods and perceived wealth now have, like the cows of early human history, have a idea or an air of power to them. And he also would predict the expansion of the leisure class, because professions like a professor or an engineer are looked up to a lot more than a profession like a plumber or a factory worker. So there are more people who would want to be plumbers, or would not want to be plumbers and be engineers instead, thus the expansion of the leisure class. The modern solutions for income inequality are talked about quite a lot on the news. Most people have probably heard some of these things. Raising the minimum wage. At the moment, they're trying to push for $15 an hour. However, that hasn't happened yet. Another is to increase union membership. Even in right-to-work states, there are some unions give the workers collective bargaining strength. They are able to band together and force their employers to pay them more, with the threat of either some sort of litigation or strike. Another would be tax increases for the rich, as this would slow down their earnings somewhat, as well as be able to provide things like infrastructure funding, possible funding for a universal healthcare system, which would in turn put more money into the pockets of regular people, as they wouldn't have to pay for healthcare. Another is to close tax loopholes. The upper classes always have access to the most, powerful attorneys, lawyers, accountants imaginable. So they are always able to find loopholes in the laws in order to not pay taxes. Veblen solutions, I think he would probably have proposed many of the same solutions as we do now. However, in his theory, those kind of solutions wouldn't be enough. As he has said, institutions are what has created the society. So if the institutions don't change, everything we'll go back to the place of the 50s and reduce income inequality, but we won't ever be able to get rid of it entirely. And his theory, change would be slow because we would have to keep up these programs of income inequality reduction over tens of generations, most likely, in order for the system to see much change. And that would be a very, very slow process. Here are my citations, and thank you very much for listening to my speech.